Hey, welcome back to the Fit and Healthy Athlete podcast. I'm excited to have you here. There's been so much happening and I'm excited to go into it today. There's just oh my goodness, there's been so many athletes, there's been so many shifts in my life. There's just been people are just doing crazy amazing things. So I hope that you are doing well. I hope that you are also doing amazing things. Couple of things I wanted to talk about really quickly before we get into the main of this podcast, the main topic. So, a couple things. Number one, the online course is available. It is open. If you would like to get into that, you can head to drkirsten.com/shop, and it is there in one of the programs that is available. It is called the Fit and Healthy Athlete Method, and it is quite literally designed to take you through my method of how I bring an athlete from feeling fit and fatigued to fit and healthy and performing at their absolute best as well as symptom free. We dive into really like the root of a lot of the things that athletes come to me to work on. We really dive I'm opening up basically what I do one-on-one with patients in this online course. The first couple modules, the first 4 weeks are all based on sport related. So for a lot of endurance athletes specifically, we dive into fueling and hydration. We dive into nutrition and recovery specifically, and really getting those dialed in for your body based on your physiology and how your body responds and reacts to those, with a ton of helpful tips on how to actually hack it. So, how do you know if it's working or not? And I have a lot of tools and tips for how to actually see how your body's responding to all of those strategies that you're practicing and putting into place. And then the last four modules are all on functional medicine for athletes. So looking at gut health and looking at micronutrients, looking at the mitochondria, and also looking at just how to help the body function really well. So there's lots and lots of stuff in there. It's a great course. It's turned into just being a lot of information that I've picked up over the years, and just it's really the product of working with a bunch of athletes and realizing what are like the key things that athletes seem to need the most knowledge about. What do they need to learn, and then how do you actually put it into place? It's so common, right, to listen to a podcast like this one, or to listen and watch videos on YouTube, and they'll say, like, well, we did this, or we tried this, or this works really well for us. But how do you know specifically what works well for you? Or if you hear like, oh, well, this product is my thing and I love that, or any number of those things, are like, I get GI distress, so this is what I do, right? Like, we've all been in those situations. Whenever you start out, it's just one of those things that you tend to pick those things up from other people. But how do you know if it really specifically works for you? And the other thing that I also realized as well is that it's so easy to kind of get lost in that place. I know when I started out, and especially when I'm at races, which I'm there, I've been at a lot of races over the past like couple of years. And one of the things that I've seen is that, you know, athletes struggle through a lot of different scenarios, and many of them lead down to either issues with fueling, issues with hydration, or something's going on in their body that they are not dealing with, or that they are unaware of is a problem. And then on race day, they get into problems and, cramping in your muscles due to issues with electrolyte balance or hydration, or, mineral imbalances, or fueling issues, just either not eating enough in their day to support their training. So they're already going in under fueled and under caloried, right? They're at a low energy availability, going in with fatigue, going in with symptoms going on in the gut and inflammation in the body, right? There's so many different things that athletes go into day of race with. And then, the race happens the way it happens, and it's either good or bad. And when it's bad, it's kind of along the lines of like, well, yeah. So what I've done in this course is I've taken all of that and figured out, first off, what are the most effective tools that help athletes be able to really accomplish their goals and what they want to achieve. And what are those things, and how can we bring that to more people so that you can go through a course and really get the most out of that. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can go to drkirsten.com/shop, and it is there. It's the Fit and Healthy Elite Athlete Method, and it is designed to help you with any goal that you have, especially around endurance racing. And if you are also an athlete that wants to take a look at what's going on from the functional medicine perspective as well, that is there too. So today, the main topic of this course, of this podcast episode, sorry, we're done talking about the course. So moving on into the episode. So today, the main topic of this episode is I'm going to tell you a little story, a little story that seems to be playing out in my life. And I wanted to share it with you because I think that it could be effective at either helping some of you be able to reframe what's going on in your life, or just give you another example of where you might be able to learn something new about what's going on in your guys' life. So I want you to picture a scenario where maybe like you weren't being able to accomplish something that you wanted to accomplish, feeling a bit held back, like something's blocking you from being able to move forward. One, I can definitely be, we've talked a lot on this podcast and on another one that I was doing a while ago about the injury, I guess, that I had over almost exactly a year ago at the Coeur d'Alene Ironman. I had a significant issue with heat and heat stress. Luckily, it didn't turn into like medically an issue. I didn't have to, see the med 10 or anything like that. And I certainly wasn't worse off compared to many other people on that day. But it ended up, after a series of some other events, it ended up leading to me breaking out in full body hives. Just a few months later, I did a relay race that led to the next morning. I woke up, due to the stress from all of it, I woke up with hives that spread from basically my low back, my sacrum, all the way to the top of my skull. And then it spread across my abdomen, and it was, going down my legs. It's a pretty awful experience. Really itchy. And ever since then, when I get stressed and I like physically experience cortisol raising, I get a hive reaction. So if you've ever seen somebody like scratch their skin and notice that it gets like really red and that like stays around, it's like a vibrant red. They just like touch somewhere on their body and it's just like really vibrant. Well, that's kind of what's happening to me right now. So if I, have too long of a day at work, or if I, go through something that I feel like is sort of just stressing me out in a way. And sometimes I don't even notice that I'm experiencing stress. It's like that response then makes me aware that I've pushed too far for right now. And that's kind of a really weird, interesting place to be. And that's what's been going on for me currently. And it's interesting because now what I'm starting, after I've been sharing this story, I've been starting to hear more and more people saying like, oh yeah, I had a really hot race. And like now my skin is like super itchy. Like there's multiple people that have been coming in being like, yeah, like I've just had like super itchy skin. Like it's definitely a histamine response. Some of them have been in response to a heat issue and some of them not. So where I first wanted to start off with this is that the body has a way of communicating, and we don't always listen to it, right? Like, I think from at least from like what I'm picking up from a lot of patients and athletes, and probably even for myself, I just have started to shift the way that I think about it, and that's really a big part of what we're going to talk about today. It's just giving you a different perspective on the different ways that the body communicates, and then how we can listen to what the body's telling us. So, and that's going to take us, I'm sure, down a few different tangents today, but I wanted to start off with the body, and everything that it experiences is communicating. And I want to sort of reframe this in the sense of, so if you talk to somebody, or if you yourself has ever experienced gut issues, could be gut cramping, bloating, swelling, pain, constipation, diarrhea, or like very, very loose stools, any sort of autoimmune condition of the gut. Alternatively, like, we could also look at any sort of like cramping that, if you have a cycle, and if you have a period, any sort of cramping or inflammation from that. If the body starts breaking out in a rash, psoriasis, rosacea, eczema, right? Getting migraines. So a lot of different chronic symptoms, fatigue that people experience, that are symptoms, and we see them as this like thing that's going wrong in the body, right? It's preventing you from being able to do something specific that you want to do. Doesn't make you feel very good. And it's almost like, when we think about them as symptoms, it's like it's something it dissociates us from maybe our responsibility, or maybe it's an emotion or a thought that we don't really want to face, right? It's like, yeah, so like, I'm feeling this way. Like, I have fatigue. I have stress. I get these like itchy, I don't actually have fatigue, but just like hypothetically, right? Like, people with symptoms are like, yeah, like, I just get all of these symptoms come up. And it almost makes it just, I don't know, it just kind of removes the, when people come in and talk with me about their symptoms, as far as like, this is what I'm experiencing. And, it, the list of symptoms is almost like dissociated, like they're not in it. And they're also like dissociated in the sense of like, then if they don't have to like be in it, then they don't have to figure out what the body is trying to say. So here's what I mean by that. One of the things that's really common with GI related issues, so gut related stuff, is that constipation, and also the opposite of just loose stools and even diarrhea. So what I'm essentially kind of talking about here is like symptoms that are often associated with irritable bowel syndrome, or irritable bowel disease, or SIBO or SIFO, or any autoimmune. A lot of stuff that's going on in the gut is, there are actual physical things we need to look at. Okay. So I'm not negating any of the things that we talk about on this podcast. Okay. Like, we talk about all of the stuff. We talk about SIBO. We talk about your bacteria. We talk about your environment of your gut. We talk about the food. We talk about how you feed that bacteria, the prebiotics. We talk about the immune system and the role that it plays. And we talk about, and going back, we talk about the imbalances of bacteria and how those influence how your gut functions. So it's all of that. And when you look at the gut, one of the things that we really want to focus in on is the vagus nerve. It's a direct line from your gut to your brain, and it's communicating all the time. So when we're looking at like constipation or diarrhea, like, or, those like that just excitatory gut, we're looking at something that's either slowing down, right? Like constipation, things aren't moving through, or we're looking at something that's just speeding stuff up and it's just roaring through. in both of those scenarios, one of the things we need to think about is how the nervous system functions and the brain controls how our body is functioning. So let's consider this, okay? Like a very common example that's given that you've likely heard about before is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is a part of our autonomic nervous system that is designed to kick in when we need to fight something, run from something, or freeze. The parasympathetic system is designed for rest, digest, to be creative. There's a lot of stuff that happens in the parasympathetic system that is basically kind of like normal living life if you're not having to like fight something or run from something. It's very important that we're able to go between the two systems. This is one thing that I work with a lot with athletes, especially with their nervous system, is we want to make sure that you can turn it on when you need to and turn it off and turn it on and turn it off. You're like turning the gas on and then you're just being able to like rest, relax, and do the things. And then you can turn it on and you can turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. We really want to have a very good way of being able to do that with the body, because that is how we prevent you from living in that like dominant state of either parasympathetic dominance or even sympathetic dominance. But we have a tendency to live a lot into that sympathetic dominant state. It's this very common, like, go, go, go. It's this, we've got to accomplish a million things. We've got to, in order for us to feel productive, we've got to do all these things. And it's a piece of maybe even some of what's been just sort of drilled into us of like, we've got to be busy, busy bees, constantly trying to do all the things and perform well, right? And take care of our families and do this and do that, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So when we're talking about then the GI tract and we're talking about the nervous system, the thing that we want to think about here is that if you are in a sympathetic place, fight, flight, or freeze, the body is not drawing blood to the gut. Because think about it. What are the things that we need to do in that scenario? We need to get all of our blood to our muscles, right? Because if we're going to need to fight or we're going to run or even freeze, we don't want blood in our gut digesting food. We want that blood in our muscles because we're going to have to do something with them. So it's common for the body to slow down and shut down the gut because it needs to focus on the other thing, the bigger thing at play here. But then what happens? So we woke up and we were immediately anxious or we were immediately stressed about something going on. We got to get the kids out of the house. We got to do this. We got to do that. It's like, right? Like immediately first moment waking up, you're already in it. And then you go throughout your day and you've got all these projects and all these things that you need to get done. And then you get to the end of the day and you're like, hey, I need to work out. I need to do this. I need to do that. And we got to get all this, we got all this stuff done. And then you're like, okay, we got to get dinner done. We got to get the kids to bed. Got to get their homework done. It's just a lot of stuff. And it's a go, 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 go to, okay, I'll maybe drink some wine, try to settle down, and then go to bed and start it all over again. There's nothing necessarily in the middle there that's helping the body be able to settle, to get into a parasympathetic state, to be able to rest and digest. So when we're in that place, it can be difficult, right, for the body to absorb and digest food. On a flip side, for an athlete, especially during big seasons, it's harder and harder and harder to get rest as you get into the middle of big seasons, traveling a lot, dealing with stress from, more or less not feeling grounded because you've traveled to multiple different places, within a few weeks span, and jet lag and, time changes and work and finances and all the family stuff as well. And then performing for your job, which is your sport, right? Like that in and of itself in those seasons can be a very stressful time in the sense of it's just, there's a lot that you got to do, right? You got to perform, you got to do all those things. And there isn't a lot of recovery time built in. So one of the things that we work on is figuring out, how do we manage that and how do we deal with that and how do we get some of that time built in as best as we can. And then also, what do we need to do to help the nervous system be able to modulate between those and deal with those? The point of all of this is that when we're looking at the GI tract, if we are experiencing a lot of problems that are associated with the gut, we've got to think about what's going on with the nervous system. Because if the nervous system is never getting to a place where you can rest and digest and be creative and all of that, have libido, right? All of those things, then that's oftentimes a very big portion of why people experience issues with their gut. But it's not often addressed because we only have a very small portion of what we typically look at when it comes to the gut. We're only looking at, like, is there parasites? Maybe we'll run calprotectin and see if there's some inflammation. Yeah, we can do a colonoscopy and just make sure that things look okay. And if things look a little inflamed, then, okay, there might be some inflammation. We might call that gastritis, maybe. But, oh, you've got IBS, you got these symptoms that we can't explain. Cool, we'll call it IBS. None of that actually looks at how is the brain and the nervous system communicating with the gut. So, and for that matter, let's also think about it as that's the nervous system communicating, but what's the gut trying to tell you? Has there been trauma? Is it telling you that you need to chill out, take a break, allow the gut to actually be able to process what just happened to it? Do we need to listen to something else that it's trying to tell you? Are there other things that need to be addressed before the body's really going to be able to move forward? Is there a belief that this is never going to go away? This is never going to get better? And you're always going to be stuck dealing with this, always getting injured, always having pain of some type. Body's never going to get back to like functioning with ease. A lot of different things. Could be emotions, right? Could be anger, frustration. A lot of times when people consider gut stuff, they also think of like feeling really nervous or anxious. Oh, there's a bunch of different emotions that can also be stored there. We talked about trauma. I remember listening to a story from a practitioner that I was learning from in chiropractic school. And one of the things she said was that, she worked a lot with pelvic floor dysfunction. She worked a lot. And so like tight or too loose of muscles. So urinary incontinence being one of those things and one of the symptoms of that. And one of the things she said was that one of the treatments that she would use was abdominal massage. And as she would start to massage these women's abdomens, they would start to cry. And that really sat with me because when you think about it, that was essentially the outward release of some sort of stored emotion or trauma in the gut. So when we repress some of these things that we experience and we don't actually allow them to tell us what's going on and to allow them to have their own voice and communicate, what do you think happens in that scenario, right? Like it brings out maybe even other ways that the body's trying to communicate. So it turns into one thing and then it turns into another and then it turns into another and it turns into another until your body is finally like, I don't know how else to get you to listen to me. Now, it's fun when you start talking about this because it's very common for people to say, well, I can't change my job. Or how can I, do that? I can't do that. I can't change these aspects of my life. I don't have this flexibility. Getting curious is one of like the biggest things about this work that's really fun, because you bring that one piece up of like, oh, I really need to be listening to my body. And then it starts to bring up all of the other things that may have gotten us here in the first place. Those underlying beliefs, those emotions. So one of the things that I was just, thinking about in response to what was going on with my skin, I I was thinking about it because emotions are a very common cause behind injuries and illnesses, especially like it's behind it, anybody, but I'm speaking specifically to athletes here. One of the things you might want to do is think about the last time where you got injured in a race. And what was the emotion that you were processing at that time? Was there like a specific event happening in your life, a stressful event? Was there something happening at work, right? Could be contracts coming up to be renewed or they're not being renewed, or an issue going on with coach or something on the team or something entirely different than that. Was there an emotion that you were processing at the time? And it may not have actually been that blatant, that aware, right? But emotions come out and they must be processed. And sometimes when we don't address them, they come out in the wrong way. And normally, like for me, especially with a lot of the work that I'm about to talk about here, like before I started into the training that I did, and then now using this with athletes, like even for myself, before this, I didn't have the tools. And I really wouldn't have had the tools to move these things through and forward for myself and then for my athletes as well. And normally what I would have done is compartmentalize everything. That's how I normally would do it. I would have been like, oh, there's that feeling. We're going to take that and stuff that in this box, and we're not going to address it because I don't want to address it. I don't want to feel that emotion. This is an inappropriate time to address that. Here's an example. So I was at the most recent half Ironman that I did in Coeur d'Alene in Victoria, BC. And I was taking a shower very commonly, a hot shower. It's been a lot better most of the time. But if I take a very, very, very hot shower or something, kind of along those lines, if I touch my skin or kind of scratch it, it can potentially get really red. And especially if I'm pretty stressed, if I haven't slept very well, if things kind of happened that didn't quite go the way I would have liked them to, then it can make that even worse. So this was the day before the race. I was feeling pretty stressed about the race itself for many different reasons. And I scratched my back, not really knowing, right? And then all of a sudden I looked in the mirror and it was just these like super red marks on my back. And it just triggered this just significant amount of emotion. And my first response immediately was like, this is not the time to deal with that. And then I was like, that's the old way that we used to do things. We're at home in our Airbnb. People are just chilling out. This is the time to deal with it. So this is how it went differently. I went into my room and I did think, was like, what are my friends going to think? It's like, what are they going to think? Starting to worry about what other people were thinking. And I was like, no, this means too much to me to worry about what other people are going to think. So I went into my room and I basically walked myself through this process. And if you don't have the process, right, like a very good tool and tip that you can do is just journal, is write it down. What's coming up? What are the emotions? What are the beliefs here? And ultimately just trying to get to the root of it. Because once you can get to the root of it, then you can start thinking of examples. You can start to try to reframe it, think of a metaphor, just change the way you're thinking about it. Also, my athletes can call me. They call me before their events. If they get into their stuff, that's why I'm here. They can call me and we can work when we work through it. Right. So I basically worked through this emotion, these things that were coming up. And a lot of them were from Coeur d'Alene specifically. They were feeling out of control because I couldn't control the weather. And it was such a shocking thing. It wasn't something that anybody expected. So there was nothing that could be done. People have been like, well, why didn't you get heat acclimatized or acclimated? And I was like, because that never really was going to be something that we needed to do. And you can't go back on that, right? Like you can't control that. And for that matter, like I didn't prepare for heat for Victoria, BC, because there was no way that it was going to be hot. And it just, we just didn't see that heat wave coming through. Nobody really did until it was too late. And sure, we tried to do all sorts of things to try to mitigate the heat, and it just was what it was. The day was what it was. So control. There was, I'm trying to think of what some of the other things were and some of the learnings from it, but it was again another one of those like those beliefs that like this is never going to get better. I'm always going to have this. And one of the negative emotions or thoughts that came out of it was like, I don't want to get stressed and have this happen every single time. So you got to turn that around to the positive of what you do want. Be able to function healthy, be healthy, function at ease. Things that my body's responding the way that it should. Right? So we did this. That's, something that I worked on, cleared that out. And the interesting thing is that the next day on the race itself, the one thing that I did have was a lot of peace in my mind and in my thoughts. I still had the same ones technically, because I could tell. I was like, my body's really not at 100%. I could feel that. But the feeling of it was different. It wasn't so hot, like fired up. It was kind of like you think the thought and you're like, yeah, this kind of sucks right now being passed by a lot of people on the bike, which is not usually my reality. But you know what? There really isn't much more we can do right now. We just got to get through it and get it done. So what happens in a lot of these cases is you might notice a shift and it just starts to feel different. And this is one of those things that, especially with chronic pain and chronic illnesses, same thing. If you're an athlete and you've been struggling to achieve a particular goal that you can achieve, but something's just holding you back from being able to do that, this is where this comes in. So, and also on race day 2, for that matter, I didn't have any hives. So that was nice. I didn't have any issues with my skin. Now, since then, though, what's been interesting is I did an exercise. Well, it was actually before that, but I've been continuing to work on this because I do personally believe that a lot of the things that we experience, they are there for us to learn a lesson of some type. I don't know if you necessarily have to believe that for it to be true, for that matter, but it's a very common pattern that, if you've ever woken up with pain one day and then had it for a while, and then all of a sudden at some point it just disappears, most likely you learned a lesson of some type. And as soon as you learn the lesson, it went away. Now that's more along the lines of chronic stuff, not necessarily like acute stuff, like you sprain your ankle and you get that swelling and stuff like that eventually goes away. But even then, could be that, why now? Why'd you sprain your ankle today? Or why'd you blow a hamstring today? Why did that specific injury? If you're thinking about football, you've been hit so many times. Why was today the day? I don't know, right? Like there's a lot of different things behind it that we have a tendency to look at it as this like binary thing of it can be only these things. But what if there's other things? What if there's emotions? What if there's limiting thoughts or beliefs? What if it's, more than that? What if it's something going on with the gut? What if it's something going on with nutrition? I don't know. A lot of different options when you start to kind of open your mind to what those options could be. So at this training, one of the things that we were doing is you essentially go through an exercise where, let's say there was like a situation that happened and you essentially can put yourself in the situation, and then you can put yourself into the perspective of the other person. And then we go to third person and take all of the learnings from both people. And it's a very, very cool process. It seems a little bit odd from the outside, but it's a cool process because one of the things that you get from it is a very different perspective on the situation. And it's very, very abstract. And sometimes for the conscious mind, it's really hard to kind of picture. But for those of you that listen to this podcast, you probably already are my people, and you already are like into this stuff anyway. And one of the goals I have is to be more open and to be a little bit more vulnerable in the sense of just sharing some of my experiences and just what I've been going through. And so, one of the things we did in this exercise is I was like, I really want to talk to my skin. That's super abstract. Like my conscious brain was like, this is ridiculous. This is never going to work. But I was there to learn. I was there to keep an open mind and just see if there was something that came out of it, right? And one of the things that I learned is that my skin was basically saying, like, you aren't listening. You are putting way too much on your plate. You're saying yes to too many things. And the only way that I know how to tell you to slow down and rest and recover and heal is I'm giving you signals of when you've pushed too hard. That's when I start itching. That's when I start having issues. So that's been a huge learning lesson for me. It's like, as soon as my skin starts flaring up, I'm like, okay, I hit a line here. It's too much. Now that's been a challenge because what's also been happening? I've been seeing a lot of people in my practice, right? I've been busy. And more people are needing more time. So what do you do? What do you do in that scenario? That's been one thing that's been a little bit interesting. I've also on the other side been working through some other limiting beliefs, working on staying healthy. And, because of that, there really haven't been any injuries. There's been a tons of breakthroughs around, some of those other aspects. And, I think the other thing to kind of remember as an outcome, this is a huge takeaway for me as an outcome for Victoria, is that my time was slower than most of my other times. I just haven't been training as much because of this thing, because of what was going on with my skin. Because when I was training, I'd just break out in hives if it was too intense. And sometimes I would be doing like literally the most chill workout and I'd just break out. It's like really frustrating. Yeah. You can maybe think about that or identify with that a little bit. Like just something happens and you're just like, man, why is this way? But the thing is like physically I kind of did less and I still performed decent. right, on this race. And for that matter, like my mindset was a whole lot different. That's a huge, huge learning piece, a positive learning piece to take into any other races. The whole goal of this race was like to start ch- um, thinking about it differently, like having positive experiences at races, because I've had so many back to back to back negative things that I wanted to have a race that was like, that was a good race. It wasn't necessarily good from the perspective that I felt like my time was good, but I did have a good day, given that some of the things were around me. I wish I had had more sleep. And I wish that there were a couple things that went differently, but generally speaking, it was a good race. So yeah, I think the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because there's just so many things that can be behind why we experience certain symptoms, certain issues, certain things that go on in the body. And there's so much more that we can dig into. Last example before I wrap up, there was, I'm trying to remember the situation that it was around, but there was a belief, a piece that I had around why oh, I know. So, I'm working with a lot of athletes, and I'm also looking to work with more professional athletes as well. It's just an aspect of my business that I'm, really wanting to incorporate. And I've worked with a couple, and it's been great. And I work with a lot of different types of people, right? So the thing though that I was digging into a bit is like, what's holding me back from that? Like, why am I blocking myself from that? So I went into this with my coach and I said, what the heck is happening here? And one of the things that we found out, and again, like trying to be more open, being more vulnerable, having a voice. Hopefully this is helpful for somebody else, right? The interesting thing was that I was still trying to prove to my now 100-year-old grandfather that my path that I chose was the right one for me. Of course, it was the right path for me. I chose it. Right. But I still wanted to prove to my grandfather that I had made the right choice. And what's interesting that came out of that is that I learned a lot of things in that exercise that I did with my coach. One of the things that came out of that was that, number one, I'm actually more like my grandfather than I recognized. I didn't recognize this until recently, but I didn't realize that he didn't own his own business ever, but he talks about entrepreneurial stuff all the time. And it was so interesting to me. So I had never recognized that piece. And then here I am starting my own business, running my own practice. It's interesting. The other thing too is I recognize as well is that for some reason I had created this mental construct that if I did certain things, then he would see, I would be able to prove to him that this was the right path. Can you see how something like that could potentially hold a person back from really being able to like move forward? So the other piece of that as well is that other people will have their other person. Might not be their grandfather, could be anybody. So those are a couple of different examples of how we can create constructs, we can create beliefs, we can create emotions that are more or less just ourselves. Like we create that thing to help us in that scenario to be able to move forward. But at a certain point, it just doesn't become helpful anymore. In fact, in some cases, it actually can hinder you from really being able to move forward. So it's the next step, it's the next layer. And the last thing I'll say, I think, is this, is that opening up a little bit to, or a lot of it, to what some of the opportunities and options are and what's available if we start to think outside the box as far as what is going on in the body and how to help the body be able to function really well as a whole, has a lot of opportunity for growth and for change and for moving forward. So I hope that you found this helpful today. It may be a little bit off the wall for some of you and may have caused some of you to really have to think about it and determine what you think. It might have been challenging a few thoughts and beliefs of things that you've known about the body. So sit with that, get curious about it. It's a good place to be. But hopefully this is an episode where you've been able to take away some tips and some things that may help you in your endeavors, moving forward, and may have helped you to sort of reframe and clear some of the misconceptions around why some things that we experience in the body just seem to keep happening and they just don't seem to go away. So awesome. So I hope that this was helpful, and I will be back next week with another episode. So if you are interested in that online course, make sure to check it out, and I will see you next week. All right. Take care.